Metal Leute. Battlefield games have experienced a downfall with their latest releases. Battlefield 5 was already a slap in the face, as it featured terrible and sometimes even diabolical mechanics that should have never been introduced into a Battlefield game. 2042, however, managed to set an even lower standard and got almost every decision wrong. This can't continue, because if it does, the Battlefield series will cease to exist, as players are continually growing more and more unhappy with the wrong decisions that have been made over and over again. I've done a similar video to this before in German. If you are one of my regulars, you've already seen this video in German a few months ago. However, I'm pretty confident that out of all the studios working on the next game, none of the people in charge of anything are understanding German. While watching streamers, I've noticed Battlefield devs lingering in chat rooms and actively asking for feedback, especially in channels of above average and top tier players. I know that the chance of my tiny channel of only 230 subscribers is reaching someone at EA DICE is extremely small. However, it's probably still above 0%. That's exactly why I'm doing this video. Let me introduce myself, to lay the foundation about the perspective that I'll be giving in this video. I'm 28 years old and I've been playing shooter games on a computer since I was 7. In my past I've been playing Counter-Strike and Battlefield extensively. In Battlefield games I have a total of more than 10,000 hours across all titles. I've played Battlefield 3 on the highest possible level and competed in competitive events for more than 2 years. Apart from that, I've played Counter-Strike since my very first days, and I've also competed in Counter-Strike Global Offensive on a notably high level, finding myself in the top 0.1% of players. In Counter-Strike, I've amassed another 20,000 hours of gameplay experience. My views on things are therefore characterized by a lot of competitive experience. I would consider myself highly competent when it comes to matters regarding online multiplayer shooters. As you can tell by the video length, I'll be very thorough and provide the most context possible. I'll be discussing every point with as much detail as possible. This video isn't meant to be a rant about previous games. It's not meant to mindlessly criticize everything without giving arguments. Rather, this video will point out mistakes in great detail and provide ideas for solutions to aid you, the developers, in making a better Battlefield game. As this video is meant to be directed at EA DICE, I'll compose myself as much as humanly possible and keep to natural and moderate language wherever possible. Before I'm addressing specific aspects in more detail, one thing is important to say right out of the gate. Battlefield games are considered casual games, and therefore shouldn't be used to force a tryharding playstyle upon the casual player base in order to have fun with the game. However, the needs and wants of competitive and casual players don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can coexist, and previous games like Battlefield 3 have shown this to be the case. Making a game that appeals to competitive players doesn't mean that the game has to be frustrating for casuals, and vice versa. It's a balance that will be a challenge to achieve, but Battlefield games managed to do this in the past. There's no reason why it should be impossible to achieve it again, given a competent development team which makes the correct decisions. The maps are the foundations of any shooter game. Especially in Battlefield games, which feature vehicles, it's super important that maps are balanced and provide areas for gameplay appealing towards infantry and vehicles alike. Previous games like Battlefield 2042 and Battlefield 5 made egregious mistakes when it comes to this balance. The maps in these titles are way too large, which can in part be blamed onto the terrible decision of introducing 128 players in Battlefield 2042. However, even Battlefield 5 featured some abominations like Panzersturm, which suffers from the exact same problems like most of the maps in 2042. The logical consequence from designing maps for 128 players is that maps are way too big. They don't feature play areas for infantry, and even if they do on specific flags, it's by far not enough to provide playable areas across the entire map. Transitioning from flag to flag more often than not results in the player getting killed from either a land or an air vehicle. There's nothing fun about it. The maps have to become smaller again, with more cover for infantry. Maps need to be designed with infantry combat in mind, because not every player wants to use a vehicle. Not every player can use a vehicle either. Unless you design a mode like Battlefield 3's Tank Superiority, in which every player gets to be inside a vehicle for the whole round, it's unacceptable that vehicles dominate the maps like they do in 2042. Meat grinder maps are generally welcome. Operation Metro in Battlefield 3 was fun, but the reason why it was fun weren't what you probably think. Yes, Battlefield 3 wasn't the most competitive game, and it had a lot of explosive garbage. However, the amount of explosives was somewhat limited. There weren't terrible gadgets like the Airburst launcher or SPH launchers that are found in Battlefield 2042, alongside with other obnoxious gadgets like the scatter grenades. That is exactly the reason Battlefield 3 Meat Grinder was fun, and Battlefield 2042 Meat Grinder isn't. There's way too much explosive garbage in the game, helping non-talented players out way too much. Reconsider how much you are helping bad players out with explosive gadgets, and limit the resupplyability of the few explosive devices that you do put in the game. Battlefield 3's amount of explosive gadgets, combined with the way slower resupply time of these gadgets, will be ideal and make Meat Grinder maps fun again. Attempts at regular infantry-only maps in 2042 have been made as well, for example Stranded in the Breakthrough mode. These maps are already much better than the other maps with vehicles on them. However, vehicular disruptions aren't the only problem with maps in newer Battlefield titles. There's another massive problem with every map in 2042. Verticality. There's way too much verticality on all of the maps. This leads to completely unreadable gameplay, because players can be on any rooftop, container, crate, or whatever other object they desire to be on top of. McKay's ability grapple hook seals the deal and destroys readability of the maps to absolute zero. This will have to change. Not only is it imperative that specialists will have to be removed to avoid players from reaching otherwise inaccessible spots, but maps will also be required to be designed in a way that allows for good readability. If necessary, place out of map boundaries on rooftops, remove the ability to grapple onto specific rooftops, or, even better, remove specialists outright. While designing the map, keep in mind even the most boring and cheesy playstyle you can think of. Would a rat want to go here? Can he? If so, how can we prevent that? Is that tall object really necessary, or can we remove or replace it? Battlefield 3 did all of this very well. If you want excellent inspiration, look no further than your very own franchise. Grand Bazaar will always be a staple in outstanding map design. Some Battlefield 1 maps also were fantastic, and even Battlefield 5 featured not really top tier, but at least decent maps, like Devastation. Infantry-only maps should not be necessary for infantry players to have fun. This hasn't been the case in the past, as Grand Bazaar brilliantly shows. Bazaar features vehicles, but it's still a great joy to play as an infantry player. The reason that is the case is because the map features dedicated spaces where only infantry players can get to. The B flag is a great example. The LAV or IFV, respectively, can't get to it, so if a fight with another infantry player is desired, the player will head to B and leave the vehicles to fight against each other on the other flags around the map. Getting to the infantry-focused flags is easy too. Pathways for soldiers are provided all over the place, connecting the B flag with all the other flags. On most of these pathways, vehicles can't enter, and fights in these areas are also infantry only. Vehicles exclusively need to stay on the outer ring of the map. This concept needs to return in the upcoming Battlefield game. It should never be mandatory for an infantry-only player like myself to have it join a specific map, only in order to have a playable experience. Design the maps in a way that make both infantry and vehicle players happy. It has been done in the past, so it can definitely be done in the future. Maps need to return to being designed for their game modes, like they were in Battlefield Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3. Battlefield 4 didn't do this for the first time, taking the Conquest layouts for maps and slapping some MCOMs in terribly chosen locations to make Rush the worst it has ever been. This can't happen again, and maps playable in the Breakthrough mode need to be designed for the mode in particular. Of course, you can reuse maps for other game modes, but it's extremely important that changes to the play areas will be made before transferring existing maps over to other modes. A great example of terrible map areas is of course found in Battlefield 2042 again. Let's take the map Stranded for example. Here you can see an overview of the map's first objective in its Breakthrough layout. Let's look at where the objective is, and then look at all of the space up here. Why is that there? Is it really necessary to include the space in the playable area? The answer is obvious. All of this extra space contributes nothing to the map, as it doesn't provide additional attack routes towards the objective. All this does is allow lazy snipers to sit back on top of the container ship, not playing the game and being an annoyance towards players who want to actually play the game. This is of course unacceptable. There needs to be more thought put into the playable limits of a map for any given game mode. If this were Conquest, it wouldn't even be too bad, as Conquest is a wider and more chaotic game mode in and of itself. However, Breakthrough layouts always have been and always will be linear, and the maps and their playable areas need to resemble this. Keep this in mind when designing the game modes in the next Battlefield. It's now more than ever important that the maps are made to the highest possible standard, because your core player base won't put up with another set of terrible maps that frustrate them every time they look at them. Stop focusing the map solely on vehicular combat, and design them so that infantry players have fun in them too. Consider the game mode you are designing the map for. Never returning specialists and abolishing 128 players will be a great aid to help with reasonable map design. Terrible maps need to be avoided like the plague. Go back to Battlefield 3 and look at its maps. Think about what made them great and implement exactly that into your next game. As I've hinted at before, the game modes need to fit well with the maps they are being played on. What has happened with Battlefield 4 can't repeat under any circumstance if the game wants to succeed. First and foremost, all of the classic and great game modes need to be in the game, obviously. There has to be Rush, there has to be Breakthrough. No discussion here whatsoever. Conquest I've never really liked because it's too large and uncoordinated for my liking. However, a vast majority of the community likes Conquest and it's Battlefield's iconic mode, so its inclusion in the next Battlefield is all but guaranteed. Breakthrough has been in the past 4 Battlefield releases and it's a conceptually great game mode. This always has been a more linear game mode, similar to Rush. The point of this mode is for both teams to fight over 1 or 2 objectives. It's extremely important that there's a focus on the map layouts for Breakthrough, as wide and open maps with hundreds of meters of nothingness around objectives isn't what the Breakthrough mode has been about. If done correctly, Breakthrough has a fantastic game mode, which I really like. If done incorrectly, like on many maps in 2042, it's a frustrating shitshow, without a clear frontline ever developing. It becomes Conquest Light, and that's not a good thing. Be diligent with the map boundaries and think about every meter of space, if it's necessary to include it, and if it contributes towards anything else than snipers laying flat on their dicks the whole round. Rush is a classic Battlefield game mode that was at its peak in Battlefield Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3. This mode is similar to Breakthrough, and if implemented correctly like in Bad Company 2 or BF3, it's the best mode by a long shot. The first few seconds of scripted gameplay at the end of the Battlefield Labs reveal trailer are obviously an attempt to nostalgia bait the players. If you go down this route, it's more than ever important that the iconic game modes will be included in the next game, for nostalgia reasons. Rush is reliant on a great map layout. Battlefield 4 shows us in great detail what happens when the map layout wasn't optimized for Rush. MCOMs have been placed in random locations on otherwise Conquest optimized maps. This instantly makes the mode unenjoyable, jarring and not fun to play. Rush in Bad Company 2 and BF3 was so good because the maps have been specifically designed for the mode. Bad Company 2 designed the maps for this mode from the ground up, and Battlefield 3 made an immense effort in cutting down the Conquest map play areas in a way that they would be optimized for Rush. This has to return in the next Battlefield game, no questions. If you want to go back to Battlefield's roots, this is the best opportunity to do so. Make Rush a staple Battlefield mode again, because this mode is exactly what the players want. Domination has been a cut-down version of Conquest with no vehicles, smaller close combat style maps, and often less players. This has always been a good mode, and it needs to come back into the next Battlefield game. In Battlefield 4, Domination was one of the 2 modes played in competitive events. In order for the next Battlefield game to develop a healthy competitive scene, the Domination mode would be a fantastic stepping stone. Make sure that the maps are small enough and don't promote a camp-heavy playstyle. Be diligent when placing out of map boundaries and make sure players can't get to any weird locations. Place out of map zones on top of buildings and any other ratty position. Don't allow players to cheese cheap kills by being in unpredictable locations. Make sure to limit verticality in this mode as much as possible. Team Deathmatch has always been plagued by a terrible spawn system. Every Battlefield title has had a horrible spawn system in Team Deathmatch, and that can't continue. It's way too frustrating to spawn in front of a prone LMG and getting immediately killed by that LMG within less than a second, without a chance of shooting back or getting into cover, multiple times in a game. The reversal of this isn't too good either. Nobody likes being on a huge killstreaks just for the entire team to spawn right behind them, ending the killstreak right then and there, just because the game decided it would be a good idea to spawn 10 players behind the player. Spawn protection and its terrible implementation is brought to my attention a lot when I play Team Deathmatch, as a direct result of the horrible spawn system. Spawn protection is a bad idea and should not be in the game. Instead of trying to fight the symptoms by implementing a broken spawn protection system, fight the illness itself. Make a good spawn system that doesn't spawn players in front of others, and therefore not requiring a spawn protection system. Sure, Team Deathmatch is a nice mode that could be really enjoyable. No vehicles, no objectives, just some fragging action. Sounds good on paper, but it's regularly ruined by insane frustrations caused by the terrible spawn system. Iron this out and bring the mode back. Niche game modes like gun game or tank superiority aren't my cup of tea, but there's no harm in implementing them anyway. Make sure to get player feedback for these niche modes to avoid bad mistakes. I'm not the right guy for that, so seek other qualified opinions on that matter. More often than not, when I read Reddit, YouTube comments, Battlefield forums, and many more, the players praise the gunplay of Battlefield 5. Whatever the frick happened here, one thing is for certain. It's terrifying to witness, and all of these people have no idea what they are talking about. One of the main driving factors to create this video, despite the chances of me being heard are probably 10 times lower than winning the lottery, is to provide an opinion that is based on facts and objective evidence, rather than on feelings or intuition. The gunplay of any game is a great candidate to be primarily perceived by feelings and intuition, as approaching this topic from an analytical standpoint would require a good and deep understanding of how the gunplay system is functioning. Most Battlefield 5 players who say that the game's gunplay is good don't seem to understand what's going on under the hood. Battlefield 5's gunplay suffers from major, inexcusable flaws, which need to never return to the series. To understand why Battlefield 5's gunplay is so bad, we have to go back in time and first understand how other titles handled their gunplay. Let's look at Battlefield 3 as an example, simply because I'm the most familiar with it. For starters, Battlefield 3 featured weapon recoil, the kickback of the weapon if you want to say it like that. When shooting the gun, it will kick upwards and either left or right from where it was originally aimed at. This recoil pattern, governing how much and in which direction the weapon is kicking towards, is specific to each weapon. Every single gun in the game has a different, discernible recoil pattern. The most important part about the recoil is that a counter for it can be learned, because the recoil for each gun is entirely predictable. This creates something that is so utterly important for any kind of online video game: a skill gap. In order for players to shoot straight for a prolonged period of time, they need to understand, learn, and counter each weapon's recoil pattern accurately. This is extremely important, because the mechanic can be used to separate good players who have invested time and effort into learning and perfecting the recoil patterns and their counters from those who haven't. This creates a gradient of skill, with more time and effort invested leading to better results. This is exactly how you should implement it, and Battlefield 3 did everything right in this regard. This is important to keep in mind, as it will become an important factor when talking about Battlefield 5 later on. Furthermore, Battlefield 3 features a mechanic called spread. People tend to completely take the mechanic out of context and hate on it for absolutely no reason. Spread is responsible for bullets missing, even when aimed straight at someone. At least that is what Reddit would want to believe. This, in certain specific situations, is actually correct, and in the situations in which the aforementioned statement is indeed correct, spread is doing its job just fine. The purpose of spread is to limit engagement distances across the map. Let's consider what happens when spread would not be in the game. Every weapon, even assault rifles, would become hyper-accurate laser beams given the necessary sightlines. This is obviously bad, and it isn't how balancing works at all. I'll go on a tangent about balancing a little later. For now, all that's necessary to keep in mind is that there has to be a mechanic that limits engagement distances for full auto weapons like assault rifles. This is where spread comes in handy. Spread will make the bullets coming out of the weapon deviate from where it's aimed at. When firing a fully automatic weapon, let's say the M16, it's not supposed to be accurate for the entire duration of the 30-round mag dump. Spread is used to make bullets miss if firing continuously for too long. For the first few bullets, spread will not be in effect at all. If the M16 is used at any reasonable distance, spread will not be noticeable and bullets will all hit the target within the first bullets. However, if prolonged fire continues after, let's say for example 5 bullets, without letting go of the trigger, spread will start to kick in. For every new bullet fired without stopping in between, the random spread will continually increase until the predefined maximum value is reached. Values for spread need to be adjusted just right, making sure that there isn't too much spread to affect the weapon and its designed distance. For example, spread should never be able to build to such high values that it's possible to miss a target at very close distances when mag dumping. On the other hand, spread needs to be present ever so slightly, even on the first bullets. This is necessary to stop the player from using the assault rifle at vast distances, because that's not what the assault rifle is designed for. At long range, even a perfectly aimed shot is supposed to miss. However, at medium distances, the slight amount of spread should never make a player miss. It's a very fine balancing act, one that can be done to almost perfection, as Battlefield 3 has demonstrated. This implementation of spread forces the player to take the correct action. If the player is suffering from spread, there's 2 reasons for it, both of which can be circumvented by the player and his decision making. The first situation would involve the player using his M16 at large distances, which would only be reserved for sniper rifles and DMRs. In this case, the user needs to recognize that his assault rifle isn't made for these long ranges and reconsider his positioning and the engagement he's taking. The second situation would involve the player being positioned within the range of being effective, but the player then fails to shoot in short bursts at medium distances in order to reverse the spread. In this case, the player needs to understand that continuous fire isn't effective at medium range and that burst firing would be the correct move. Both of these aforementioned scenarios increase the skill gap in the game. It takes good judgment from players to know at which distances the assault rifle is effective. This can easily be done by the most experienced players, but might pose a challenge to a new player. This creates a skill gradient, just like with the recoil. The same is true with the second scenario. Depending on the distance to the opponent, the ideal amount of bullets fired within a burst varies. At medium to long distances, a 3-bullet burst might be more effective, and at close to medium range, a 6 or 7-bullet burst might be the best play. This too creates a skill gap, with players being able to judge those distances better, ending up winning gunfights. Now let's switch over to Battlefield 5 and see what it's doing wrong. Let's start with the recoil. Just like the other titles, Battlefield 5's guns all have recoil. All the base recoil patterns are also predictable, learnable and counterable, just like in the other titles. Nothing wrong so far. Battlefield 5 handles spread completely different. As stated above, in older games spread would make the bullets coming out of the weapon miss the longer a weapon would be fired for. The amount of spread would be predefined, but the bullet's deviance in direction would be random, which is good and necessary. Battlefield 5 discards this approach, and all weapons don't feature deviating bullets anymore. The problem is a mechanic called spread to recoil conversion. As you might be able to tell by the name, spread in Battlefield 5 is calculated similarly to its predecessor games. However, instead of making the bullets deviate from the aiming point, the spread will be converted to recoil, stacking itself on top of the already existing recoil. Remember when I said that a skill gap is important? This approach that Battlefield 5 is taking is causing the exact opposite. As mentioned, spread is inherently random, which it needs to be in order to limit engagement distances. However, if a random value is added on top of an already existing recoil, the already existing recoil becomes random. Randomness in the recoil pattern inevitably decreases the skill gap. That's not how you should design a game. What Battlefield 5's system is doing is taking away the player's ability to counter recoil by learning patterns, like you could do in previous titles. The player is not being told when an uptick in recoil is going to happen, by how much, or in which direction. There's no feedback loop and players aren't being told how to counter the recoil effectively. This is the worst possible implementation. Let's come back to Battlefield 3's system once more. As I've said before, people always used to blame spread for making them miss at closer to medium distances. However, spread was only a victim of another terrible design concept that should never have been implemented into the game: suppression. This diabolical mechanic is the main driving factor in missing shots while aimed perfectly even at closer distances. Suppression has a direct impact on the amount of spread. If the player is being suppressed, the weapon spread will increase by 100%. Even burst firing will not help in the situation, because when the player is being suppressed, he is not supposed to be firing back. This is the sole reason that spread was hated. Suppression is meant to give bad players a reward for not aiming at their opponent correctly. As I've said before, this is a diabolical mechanic that should have never been in the game under any circumstance. Not only did this abomination of a mechanic drastically decrease the skill gap, it also rewards bad players for being bad. This is exactly the wrong approach, and should therefore never be present in a game in the future. Abolishing suppression in Battlefield 5 was one of the few good moves that have been made, and it should stay this way. If suppression were to ever return, it's to be a visual effect only with no impact on weapon mechanics. For the sake of any good player's sanity, suppression should never ever return, not even as a visual effect. To sum up the gunplay aspect, it's imperative that the gunplay of the next game returns to where it has been in the past. Reward player skill, create a skill gap, and make sure that players aren't being rewarded for being bad. What is supposed to happen with gunplay will be a theme across this entire video. Better players finally need to be rewarded for being better again. This is the only way the next game will be able to capture the franchise's veterans and new players alike. As I'm going to reiterate throughout this entire piece, the game can't be tailored towards Gen Z TikTok attention span players. Without much foresight, catering to that kind of audience might seem profitable in the short term. However, this approach might create player satisfaction for a few hours at most, after which it will become boring for almost everybody alike. All efforts should therefore be directed towards retaining players by giving them something to improve upon. If a learning curve is provided, for example by a learnable recoil pattern and the correct application of burst firing, players have something to aim for in the long term. Games like Battlefield 3 being played even today by more people than 2042 brilliantly proves this to be true. Balancing a massively large game like Battlefield has always been a difficult act. It's to be expected that not every weapon, every vehicle, every gadget, or every piece of equipment is meticulously balanced. That's not even possible, as the subject is reminiscent of the beauty discussion in real life. In order for beautiful people to exist, ugly and heinous-looking deformities like myself must also exist, otherwise beauty could never be appreciated, as everybody would just look like the same. That's exactly the same with weapon balancing. In order for good weapons to exist, not so good weapons and also pure trash has to exist. Otherwise, we could never appreciate the greatness of some guns. Trying to make every weapon viable and as good as the other is basically lost time, as this will never be achievable, and even if it were, it would make the game bland and it would become boring really fast. This has happened with 2042. To me it feels like every weapon was meant to be meticulously balanced, and therefore all the guns in the game feel kind of the same. It results in the PP-29, an SMG, being the most popular gun, even at medium distances, because it was balanced in a way that is viable like that. Previous Battlefield titles did not choose this approach, as in Battlefield 3 for example the SMGs are strictly limited to being good at only close distances. Battlefield 3's approach is exactly how it should be done. There's an inherent limitation to every weapon, and players need to be able to adapt to situations. If the player is playing on larger maps with more open space, he needs to consider equipping an assault rifle, a light machine gun, or even a DMR. If a map is mainly located inside a building, in close quarters situations, or in narrow corridors, it's better for the players to choose an SMG or a shotgun. This too can create the ever so important learning curve and skill gap. The game should signal the player when he's doing something wrong. In case of 2042, a player should be signaled that shooting someone at distances of upwards of 50 meters with an SMG isn't the correct move. Bullets should miss, and even if they do hit, they shouldn't do the same amount of damage as an assault rifle at these distances. However, in 2042, this hasn't been done, as an attempt at making every weapon viable for every situation has been made. This is the last thing you would want in the next game. It has to be exciting, even more so than its predecessors, to regather the interest of a majority of the player base. Without hating on it, it's pretty obvious that the failure of 2042 has deterred a lot of the player base from the franchise. If Battlefield wants to survive, this needs to stop with the next release. Adding to that, not only the weapons need another thought. Gadget balancing is also up for debate and needs to be thoroughly thought through. There are certain gadgets in 2042 that are very frustrating to play against. Especially those kind of gadgets that can be used to score cheap kills are highly frustrating to encounter. Things like the SPH explosive launcher or the airburst launcher need to be outright removed. These gadgets are specifically anti-infantry gadgets and serve no real purpose outside of scoring cheap explosive kills. Yes, the SPH launcher can be used to damage light transport vehicles, but that's not how it's being used in practice. When looking at balancing and which gadgets to add, always think about the rattiest playstyle imaginable. The moment that adding the SPH launcher was crossing your mind, it should have been the next step to sit down and think thoroughly about if this gadget could be in any form abused by bad players to score cheap kills on good players. It should have been immediately obvious that this was the case, and that the main use case of this gadget was to achieve exactly that. It doesn't even take a lot of imagination to come to that conclusion. At this moment, the idea of adding this gadget should have been scrapped in favor of another feature that provides a meaningful skill gap. Balancing is more important than ever. It's also important to listen to the right feedback when it comes to balancing. Reading Reddit, one might think that players want Battlefield to be more realistic, because it always has been. However, Battlefield obviously never has been realistic, and it should not be held to that standard either. Gameplay balancing and realism very often don't go together. Some mechanics can't be further from reality, however they are important to create a playable experience. If the player wants to play a highly realistic military simulation, they have a lot of good options to choose from, ranging from armor, over Hell Let Loose, all the way to games like Squad. There's enough of these games around already, Battlefield doesn't need to be another one. The Battlefield franchise has always been an arcadey, casual game, and it definitely should stay that way. Keep movement options in the game at any cost. Movement will get its own section in a moment, but it plays a big role in balancing too. Movement can, if implemented correctly, provide players with yet another opportunity to separate themselves from others. Here again, the realism argument needs to go out of the window. Even if it wouldn't be realistic for a soldier to jump peak in real life, this needs to be doable in the game. Again, the same premise remains. Don't look at realism. Instead, provide opportunities for better players to actually be better. Reward skill. There's a distinct difference between realism and playability. No, weapons should not be as accurate as they are in real life. That destroys gameplay readability, it would destroy map layouts, and it would completely annihilate aggressive playstyle. Weapons should not kill as fast as they can in real life either. This would lead to way too slow and camp-heavy playstyles, and again, it would hinder aggressive players. Realism should not be the angle you approach balancing from. It's an opinion that was probably formed as some sort of elitism, as in, we Battlefield players are so much better than the COD players because our game is more realistic. If you want your next game to succeed, seek feedback regarding balancing not on Reddit, not in the Battlefield forum, as most of the users are delusional. Rather, look at players with actual competitive experience in previous Battlefield titles to provide qualified opinions about what is and what isn't important when it comes to balancing. As I mentioned a few sentences ago, the next game needs to provide players with some movement options to separate themselves from others. However, find a balance that is reasonable. Don't overdo it, don't become a Call of Duty copy with wall running, jetpacks or any of that garbage. Nobody would want that. Attempts at movement mechanics have been made in the past, and they were honestly pretty good. The slide mechanic in Battlefield 5 was solid and it provided players with an opportunity to outmove their opposition in specific situations. Fall damage could be avoided by triggering a roll animation when falling down. All of this was good, and it increased the skill gap when it comes to movement. However, the slide mechanic had more potential, which was left on the table as the result of trying to keep good players from being good. The slide in Battlefield 5 had a turn rate cap, which reduced the viability of this mechanic significantly. Return to the slide mechanic in the next game, and delete the turn rate cap. This way, players can use the slide mechanic to their advantage in more situations, and it also creates a meaningful skill gap. Remember that. Always reward skill. Battlefield 4 removed the ability to shoot weapons mid-air. This undoubtedly needs to return, and Battlefield 5 already did this well. Players need to be able to jump shot, because this will make it harder for the opponent to hit a jumping player. It can be used to pull crosshairs off angles, or to simply gain an advantage over a stationary player holding an angle. Despite objections from players who can't aim, this needs to be implemented again, for this exact reason. If a player can't aim, he's supposed to lose a gunfight. It should not be possible for a mechanically inferior player to win a gunfight, and the movement needs to contribute to that. Movement is an aspect of gameplay that has a lot of potential. With this great potential also comes great responsibility to not fuck any of this up. Yes, I'm bringing up Battlefield 4 and its numerous bugs. There are a flurry of problems when shit like that goes through. You can tell I'm really mad about this by the aggressive language. Whatever has happened in Battlefield 4 is nothing short of egregious, and shit like that can never, and I repeat, never, happen again. For starters, the vast majority of bugs are outright unfair. Playing against other quote-unquote players, or rather, subhumans, who trigger these bugs at every peak feels exactly like playing against cheaters. Their hitboxes vanish, they are before possible to hit while executing the bug abuse. Meanwhile, most bugs cause players to teleport underneath the map, forwards or backwards, in completely unreadable and unpredictable locations. Playing against fly hackers or bug abusers isn't much of a difference. While players are teleporting on your screen, they are seeing everything normal from their screen. Some bugs don't consider the player jumping, meaning the bug abusing animal can shoot while in a bugged state. This allows them to essentially shoot back at others while being bugged underneath the map. Players who are otherwise completely dogshit at any other game are enabled to be quote-unquote good in Battlefield 4 by abusing bugs that render them unhittable while they can shoot accurately themselves. There's a reason why no one of these allegedly good players of Battlefield 4 have been seen on top of scoreboards in other Battlefield games. Secondly, this creates other problems. These pieces of subhuman garbage will then record their disgusting bug abuse, upload it to YouTube, and garner thousands of clicks and likes from what is essentially cheating. This is all enabled by the game having all of these bugs to abuse in the first place. Thirdly, relying on the community admins to deal with this garbage will not solve the problem. As seen en masse in Battlefield 4 servers today, bug-abusing feces are not only allowed to play on most of the community servers, but vile admins explicitly allow them to do so, and even take side with them. Of course, I'm putting most of the blame on the garbage that's abusing this at every possibility. Even if one knows about all of these bugs, basic human decency could be applied, as nobody is forcing anyone to abuse these bugs. However, there's a good chunk of blame to put on the Battlefield 4 development team, who let this happen in the first place. It's also not to be understated that Battlefield 4's dev team have been alerted to these bugs numerous times. It has been brought to their attention by some of Battlefield 4's competitive players, yet nothing has ever been done about it. Movement is one of the few things that can really make or break a game. If done well, it will be a wonderful addition to a game and make it all that more enjoyable. On the flip side, it has the possibility to completely destroy an otherwise decent game. If you need a reminder of just how much bugged movement can outright kill a game, join any Battlefield 4 server and see it for yourself. It should be obvious that any kind of semblance of this tragedy can't repeat in the future. After witnessing the horror that is Battlefield 4, it should be a no-brainer to meticulously test every single bit of movement for bugs, and if necessary, eradicate all of them. Even if some bugs make it through testing, it's absolutely critical to listen to player feedback and to address any bugs that might come up. Avoid another Battlefield 4 situation at all cost. Technicalities probably aren't the first thing that come to mind when thinking about what needs to be crispy clean at release. Many might think that maps, balancing, and all of that stuff is important. And yes, while all of that is indeed important, the technicalities are just important, if not even more so. Battlefield 2042 showed us that many problems that should have been ironed out a long time ago still are in the game, but there's also new problems that surfaced with 2042. It should never come this far, however 2042 has showed us that we are actually needing to talk about something that has been standard practice for as long as PC gaming is around: a correctly functioning mouse input. Sadly, 2042 has shown us impressively just how bad the mouse input can get. There are multiple layers to this horrible mouse input in 2042. most of which can be explained by technical slip-ups that should never be able to happen. However, even the most mangled engine, the worst written source code, and the most terrible performance should not influence the mouse input like it did in 2042. For starters, the game runs terribly slow. More on that later. For now it's enough to keep in mind that the game runs on low frame rates all the time. This sets a terrible precedent for the mouse input from the start. Lower frame rates means more input lag. Input lag is something you would avoid at any cost in games that require precise input. FPS games fall under this exact category, which is why reducing or eliminating input lag should always, under any circumstances, have the utmost importance when designing a game. Secondly, the game suffers from various mouse input bugs. The recoil has been bugged from the start of the game, which was never figured out by the developers themselves. US streamers Enders and Baronox had to find out what was actually wrong with the mouse input, especially while firing a weapon in full auto and correcting the recoil either too little or not at all. I'd love to show the clips, but sadly I can't because of copyright law in Germany. I'll link the videos in the description for you to see yourself. This bug stores recoil in some sort of cache, which you will first have to file through when starting to compensate for recoil, before getting to compensate on the new recoil. It's hard to describe in words, it's best to boot up 2042 and try it for yourself. Aim down sights, let about 30 or 40 bullets fly, while not compensating for the recoil at all, then pull down in a smooth, linear movement. Two of the best weapons to test this with are the PP29 and the PKP. The feeling on the downwards movement is obviously terribly wrong, and it's the direct result of a bug. This inactively makes your sensitivity feel lower. Anyone who's been on a computer for more than 2 hours and held a mouse in their hands once can probably see why this is bad. After finding out about the bug, it was indeed momentarily fixed in a mid-season update. However, within a few weeks after the bug has been fixed, the next big update from the upcoming season rebugged it. The bug has since never been fixed again, and it is to remain in the game forever. This is obviously unacceptable. Bugs like this need to be ironed out before the game gets installed on any other computer than the DICE internal testing machine. Not even in a publicly accessible beta. This sort of a bug shall exist. Fuck-ups like that are unforgivable, and your observant players will be able to tell immediately that something is terribly wrong. I remember launching the 2042 beta for the first time, and after 1 minute of playing the game saying to my friends in TeamSpeak, yes, something's wrong with the mouse input. It took years and the minds and time of your most dedicated community members to figure out what was actually wrong. It took another few months to get the update out, and all of that just for you to rebug the same problems right back into the game later. Thorough testing is mandatory for the next Battlefield game, because mouse input problems like these can't and won't be tolerated anymore. No excuse warrants the mouse input being this bad, especially not in a first-person shooter game. As hinted at before, the mouse input isn't the only problem modern Battlefield games suffer from. The performance of these games has continually decreased since Battlefield 1. I get that games are evolving and that age-old hardware won't be able to hold on forever. However, more optimization needs to be done regardless. Before recently upgrading my CPU, I was running an Intel Core i9-10900K, which was overclocked to 5.2 GHz on all 10 cores. That CPU was only able to yield a frame rate of about 100 FPS. That is completely unacceptable, as anybody somewhat sensitive to input lag will puke when touching the mouse and keyboard in your game. Shooter games are more than any other game reliant on responsive mouse input. This can only be achieved by sufficiently high frame rates. I'll admit that I am somewhat of a special case, as I'm able to tell the input lag difference between a 240 and 360 Hz monitor, so I'm extremely sensitive to any kind of mouse delay. However, even a quote-unquote normal, above-average player will feel the input lag when a game doesn't run on at least 150 or more FPS. Even after upgrading my CPU from a 10900K to a 14700K, a significantly better processor with more cores and vastly higher IPCs, the game barely runs any better than before. At times it's barely able to scratch 200 FPS, while staying below 150 most of the time. This inevitably contributes to the horribly feeling mouse input, and it needs to be figured out. The trend started already with Battlefield 5, which on my 10900K was also barely able to scrape together 200 FPS, even on 32-player servers. This poses a significant problem for a large number of players. Most players can't afford to buy the latest and greatest hardware every other year. A lot of potential players are on mid-range hardware that might only yield 100 FPS or less. On the other hand, there are people like me who could afford new hardware but aren't too happy with fraudulent hardware manufacturers like Nvidia getting away with €3,000 MSRP graphic cards, therefore refusing to give them more money. I'm a firm advocate of the vote with your wallet principle, which is why I'm simply refusing to upgrade from my 2080 Ti. I know a bunch of other people who think alike. Whatever the reasons might be, it is to be expected that players will be on mid-range hardware at most. High-end computers can't and never should be expected. Meanwhile, 144Hz monitors are common today, as they've become super affordable, even for budget gaming setups. Players with 144Hz panels will feel input lag when your game isn't running above 144 FPS. It's imperative that the dev team makes a considerate effort towards optimizing the game, even for lower-end hardware. A scenario like 2042, where even the high-end computers struggle to reach 200 FPS, isn't acceptable and will deter a significant amount of players. Other games can do this too. Counter-Strike recently got upgraded to the Source 2 engine, a much newer and more complex engine. However, the game still runs fine on my 14700K, and it did so on the 10900K as well, reaching more than 400 FPS regularly. It's important to realize that graphical fidelity isn't all the players want. Folks on mid-range hardware wish to be able to set graphical options even lower than currently possible in exchange for better FPS. This needs to be an option in the next title, no questions asked. DLSS and other similar upscaling features on modern graphics cards should also never be taken into consideration. One reason for that is that older hardware, like for example the 900 series of Nvidia cards, doesn't support it, and there are exactly these kind of cards that would need the feature the most. Another problem with upscaling technology is the reduced visibility, which is a result of lower render resolution. This might be just fine for single-player games, where analyzing every pixel on screen for movement isn't as important. But it's not an option for multiplayer games, where missing detail in the image can mean the difference between the player seeing or not seeing an opponent and dying as a result of missing critical information. Take all of the above into consideration when thinking about the game's optimization. It's extremely important that the vast majority of players can run the game smoothly on widely used 144Hz panels. I think it's not a surprise to say Battlefield 2042 has an abysmal netcode, and so did all of the other Battlefield games too. Dying around corners and behind solid cover is still happening quite a bunch. To be completely fair, it's by far not as bad as it has been in Battlefield 3. The increased tick rate from Battlefield 3's 10Hz to the new server system used since Battlefield 4 with 60Hz is definitely doing its job at a certain extent. However, the netcode performance is still erratic and inconsistent at best. There have been instances where I was dying seconds after reaching cover. It doesn't happen all the time, but I've seen my fair share of these situations. I'm obviously not knowledgeable about the intricacies of the engine, but if this were happening in CS, I would look towards simulation rate drops caused by high CPU usage on the virtual machine the server is running on, or similar kind of problems with overloaded hardware. This isn't an internet problem on my end, as I'm a 1 gigabit fiber connection with lower than 10 milliseconds ping and 0% packet loss all the time. Wireshark captures while this is happening all but confirm that my internet can't be to blame, and neither can be the server tick rate, the send or receive rates, or anything related to latency. This must be happening server-side, and for the next game to be less frustrating in this regard, it might be worth looking into it and figuring out what is causing this erratic netcode behavior. This would also likely help with the terrible hit detection. Contrary to the dying around corners issue, which only appears from time to time and aren't irregular occurrences, not getting hit markers on opponents when hit markers should undoubtedly be appearing is observed at least multiple times a match, sometimes even on every other gunfight. This has been a problem since the beginning of time. It was a problem when I first into contact with the Battlefield franchise in 2010 in Bad Company 2, and it has persisted throughout the franchise. Terrible hit detection has been in every Battlefield installment and is yet to be fixed or at least made bearable. Elevating the hit detection to a level where egregious no-regs would happen at the same rate as dying around cover would already be a massive improvement. Anything, really, would be an upgrade above the current state of the hit detection system, where basically every other gunfight is lost, due to bullets not registering despite being aimed perfectly and blood splatter effects being displayed on client side. The problems with hit detection, from what I can tell, aren't even a problem with the server tick rate or any related performance metrics at all. The terrible hit detection was present in Battlefield 3, which features 10 Hz netcode, and it's still present in all the modern Battlefield titles with higher tick rates. This too isn't a problem with internet connections either. The same I've said for the previous point about dying around corners is true here too. I'm on a 1 gigabit fiber connection and I'm playing with a ping below 10 milliseconds on a constant 0% packet loss. Wireshark captures from around with terrible hit detection are consistent with what is to be expected and show no signs of dropping network performance. There has to be something wrong with the coding and the hit detection algorithm. To make gunfights fair and not dependent on the roll of a dice, it's important to finally tackle the terrible inconsistencies with hit detection to avoid frustrations across the board. After all, Battlefield is a shooter game. If anything needs to work, it's the shooty bit of your shooter game. Make absolutely sure to finally provide players with a working hit detection system. There's other games that did this more than well enough in the past. Counter-Strike Source does this almost flawlessly. Counter-Strike Global Offensive did it extremely well too. Look at these games, figure out why their netcode solutions work and why these games don't have major issues with hit detection and apply that to your own game. The visibility has been a problem in a lot of previous Battlefield games. The worst offender of this is of course Battlefield 5, where players can hide in plain sight simply because the visibility is that bad. Nobody likes being killed by something they can't see. Mistakes like that seem small, but dying to some invisible prone rat in a bush 10 times a game will instantly kill any fun, no matter the quality of the game. Don't even think about making compromises in this regard at all. Don't trade off even 1% of player visibility with graphical fidelity. If, in order for players to see each other correctly, the game has to look like Minecraft, then make it look like Minecraft. Of course, this doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Battlefield 3 had great graphical fidelity. If set to ultra, it could compete with modern games in terms of graphics no problem. However, it also achieved excellent visibility. Look at Battlefield 3's graphics, what made them great, why it worked, and then implement that into the next Battlefield game. A vital part of making sure paying customers won't run from the next Battlefield game like it's some sort of predator is to ensure that the game is in a playable state in terms of bugs and glitches at full launch at the very least. However, as part of the first impression, I in my opinion would highly advise for the game to be in a decently polished state when it reaches the first customers, as early as the beta. I distinctly remember when 2042's Season 1 launched back in 2022. Shroud, one of the most watched streamers on Twitch at the time, was set to play the game for his live audience in front of more than 20,000 viewers. The abysmal state of the game, its numerous bugs, and the massive performance impact on any computer, no matter how end, would make it impossible for Shroud to get past the loading screen. The game would crash on him, it would lock his computer up and behave like a virus. He wasn't able to use his computer for seconds at a time, while the game was in a bugged state which rendered his entire computer unusable. After he closed the game, all of his desktop icons were shifted, the capture card was suddenly set to the wrong monitor, possibly due to the game screwing around with the main monitor setting in Windows. He was so frustrated from this behavior that it led to him uninstalling the game. On the spot, right there, in front of at least 20,000 people watching. He was asking for the game to be removed from his library altogether. Stories like this, witnessed live by more than 20,000 people, are the worst marketing campaign you can possibly run. What is absolutely critical is that the next game doesn't behave like a literal computer virus at any point in its life cycle. Imagine the amount of players that you could have convinced to try out the game because they saw it on Shroud's stream. Even though I've never been through a marketing class in university, I can pretty confidently speculate that marketing on Twitch is probably the most efficient marketing a game can possibly be, and especially so if super large streamers with tens of thousands of viewers advertise the game for free. After all, everybody watching Shroud's stream at that moment is in some way, shape or form interested in video games. I'd argue that all of the 20,000 viewers he had at the time were exactly within the target audience, and therefore potential customers that could have been convinced to buy the game, given a great showcase. Instead, all of these people who have contemplated to give the game a try are now never in their right mind going to buy an EA game again. All of this negative publicity could have been avoided by fixing bugs and making sure that the game is, at the very minimum, in a rudimentarily playable condition. It's imperative for the next title to never even come close to being in such an abysmal state in which Battlefield 2042 has been for its long time. To whoever has never cared about Battlefield 2042 or its controversies, I'm willing to bet the term legacy feature is a foreign concept. Admittedly, before 2042, even I didn't know what a legacy feature was. Legacy features are EA corporate speak for essential features that have been part of every shooter game in the existence of mankind, which for some reason have been omitted from 2042. Some of these legacy features include an in-game chat, a scoreboard, and a server browser. Each of these inescapably need to be part of the next Battlefield game. For starters, the in-game chat is highly important. There's multiple reasons for this. One is to create a community, to talk to friends and foes alike, and even to trash talk other people. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent about free speech right now, because I've noticed this trend in many different games. Free speech is a highly important, basic human right. Everyone can speak their mind freely, without being censored. That's the case here in Germany, where freedom of speech is anchored inside the German constitution. This is common practice in most countries that value basic human rights. More and more do I see people all across the internet getting offended by basic criticism. A common argument brought forward by easily offended people always boils down to some form of intolerance. I've even seen a quote saying, "I'm intolerant towards intolerance." This is commonly used to dismiss anything they don't like as intolerance. The issue I'm having with this is that this completely wrong approach is being chosen by a lot of companies all across the gaming industry. Riot Games certainly is one of the worst offenders of that. Valid criticism about players, games, and management officials is dismissed as being intolerant, and attempts at silencing the critic are being made. I, as a German citizen whose right of free speech is explicitly stated in the constitution, take offense in this practice. Removing the chat from a game as a form of attempt to silence critics is a terrible move that should have never been considered. If I want to tell the opponent that he's trash at the game, I should be allowed to do so. If I want to tell my squad that they should get their asses off a point and start moving, I should be allowed to do so. This includes the use of insults. I myself have been banned for calling an opponent, who was provoking me first, mind you, dogshit tier garbage. The problem with banning any semblance of insults from the game and its communication channels is that too many things can be interpreted as insults, even though they aren't. I don't think you need to be a frequent Reddit visitor to know that even the most basic form of disagreement and criticism, without any strong language at all, can and will be viewed as an insult by certain people. I've seen people calling for other users to be banned from Reddit, simply because they've been told, "You're bad at the game, try improving." The solution isn't to silence those who dare to speak their mind freely. Keeping players from speaking their mind freely within a game's chat and banning them from when they do isn't going to help the case at all, and it won't increase the tolerance of players towards criticism. The right move rather would be to allow more criticism and more insults. Allow players to go at each other in the game chat without trying to silence them for anything but the obvious slurs, which obviously should be banned. This is even more so applicable in Battlefield games, since the games are rated 18+ or mature. Players who can't deal with strong language or insults shouldn't play games rated for mature audiences in the first place. I know this isn't the best comparison, but I think about this like a vaccine. I think we all can agree that vaccines work, except those who are lunatics who believe in some sort of nanotechnology conspiracy. Vaccines work by exposing the body to the very same viruses it's meant to protect them from. This builds an immunity. It's kind of the same with the immunity to being critiqued and also insulted over the internet. People need to be exposed to it and deal with it more, to build an immunity against it, instead of meticulously trying to keep any kind of harsh language or even just criticism away from them at any cost. Obviously, and this should be abundantly clear, I'm not advocating for an unfiltered chat, and I absolutely do not condone any kind of slur, no matter the circumstance. Any kind of derogatory slur, for example the N-word, blatant misogyny, or other remotely similar, obviously need to be censored and banned and dealt with immediately. However, calling someone dogshit tier garbage after being provoked should never be grounds for a ban. In my opinion, it's a good thing to bring back the chat, like we had it in Battlefield games previous to 2042, It is an essential legacy feature that desperately needs to find its way into the next game. Another very important legacy feature, even more so than a functioning chat, is the server browser. In basically any game ever produced, the player is able to choose the server he wishes to play on. The server browser needs to include critical information, like the map that's running, the map rotation that's coming up, the amount of players present on the server's location, its ping, and of course the rules that you have to adhere to. Ideally, it includes a preview of the live scoreboard for the player to gauge which team he'll be joining and if there's a blatant cheater present. Furthermore, the live scoreboard within the server browser enables players to gauge if an attempt at joining the server is worthwhile in the first place, as the round could be over soon. All of this was present in all games up until Battlefield 5. The live scoreboard vanished from Battlefield 1 onwards, which certainly is a bummer. However, the player was still able to choose the server of his liking. Battlefield 2042 is the first game which has removed the server browser from the base game. This is terrible for a broad spectrum of reasons. First and foremost, it's basic human nature to have different opinions and also different tastes. For this reason, not every player likes every map that's in the game. I, for example, don't enjoy vehicle maps at all, so I prefer to play infantry-focused maps like Redacted or Stadium. 2042 features no filtering options in its matchmaking algorithm. I don't know the reason for this, but the reality is that this is unfathomably frustrating. Before the player can even begin to play the game, they'll have to spend a good chunk of time in the game's main menu, searching for a map they want to play on, and aborting the matchmaking over and over again if a suitable map can't be found. Before a player even gets to play the game for a single second, he's already frustrated by the terrible matchmaking implementation. It should be obvious that some basic form of filtering, at the very least, is required. The bare minimum would be to include a selection menu where players can choose the map they are matchmaked into. However, that's scraping the bottom of the barrel at best. Players should never be forced to participate in a matchmaking queue in the first place. Like in the past, players have to be able to freely choose the server they want to play on. Honestly, this point isn't even up for debate. Replacing the matchmaking system with a server browser is an unavoidable move. Persistent servers and community servers are essential for retaining the player base. Battlefield 3 has community servers that are active even today, and they have existed for the game's entire lifecycle of more than 15 years. These communities are only possible because of persistent servers, rented, owned, and managed by the community. One concern I'm having with the matchmaking system is the possibility of a skill-based matchmaking system being present. Skill-based matchmaking, abbreviated SBMM from now on, is a diabolical mechanic that attempts to matchmake players of similar skill into a lobby. This creates a curated and sterile experience. There are multiple reasons why SBMM is bad, and I'll not cover all of them, as that would escalate the video length even further. There are so many reasons why SBMM is bad, I could talk about it for 10 hours straight. One major problem with SBMM is the fact that lobbies will always feel the same, no matter what. Because of the inherent nature of SBMM, players on the opposing team and on the player's team alike will always be of similar kind. This creates the same experience every time the player plays the game. This curated experience is not what Battlefield is. At the core, Battlefield games have always been a natural, chaotic environment with a lot of natural variance. One round, the player has great teammates and the opposing team gets steamrolled. On another round, the player has terrible teammates and gets rolled. This natural variance was able to happen because Battlefield never featured SBMM in previous games. Another bad effect of having SBMM is the fact that every game of Battlefield would become a sweaty try-hard game. Playing the game would not feel like a casual, natural experience, and that's what Battlefield games should be about. Instead, it becomes a hyper-competitive scrim, which feels like playing in a competitive setting for prize money. This is not what a casual game like Battlefield should feel like. If a player would want to play in a competitive environment, he would organize scrims, or PCWs, private clan wars as we used to call them back in the days. If a more serious and regulated environment was desired, players could join the ESL network and play on their platform competitively. All of this has to be optional though. If a player doesn't want to be part of a competitive environment, you should never force it down their throat. SBMM is doing exactly that, which is why it should never be even considered. The effects of an SBMM system would have on a Battlefield game can already be observed in the game Delta Force. It's another combined arms game that directly competes with Battlefield. Despite the official statements from their development team, Delta Force definitely features an SBMM system. The game is completely unplayable and unenjoyable, for the exact aforementioned reasons. I would consider myself a very, very strong critic for Battlefield 2042, and I don't like a lot about it. However, I find myself having way more fun in 2042 than in Delta Force, despite Delta Force being a significantly higher quality game. The reason why it's even more frustrating than Battlefield 2042 is the presence of skill-based matchmaking. It instantaneously kills the game. Once a system like SBMM has been added to a Battlefield game, it's no longer a Battlefield game. Never, ever, in your wildest dreams, even consider adding SBMM to the game if you still want to have a franchise after the next release. Considerations have to be taken when implementing a community server hosting feature. Battlefield 3 and 4 let players rent their own servers on third-party sites. Players would gain full administrative rights, which includes kicking and banning any player at their leisure. Obviously, this comes with a lot of problems. This topic I can elaborate on from personal experience, because what I'm about to say has happened to me in Battlefield 3 more than 100 times, at least. Of course, there are only a limited amount of servers available at any time. Because the player base is limited, the amount of servers that will fill up daily for players to play on are also limited. I started playing Battlefield 3 with 6 years of online shooter experience under my belt already, including more than 1000 hours in Bad Company 2. This allowed me to play on the highest level from the earliest days of the game. Naturally, humans aren't very good at admitting fault, and Battlefield admins aren't an exception. They're notoriously bad at accepting that they've been destroyed by pure skill and that the other player might be better at the game than them. Because there are no restrictions in place at all, any admin that has been royally shit on is able to simply go into his admin console and get rid of the problem. Not by sitting on their ass and improving at the game or to eventually beat me, but by simply clicking a button on their console and banning me for cheating. I'm currently in a situation where I can't play Battlefield 3 at all anymore, because every admin of all the remaining servers has decided to ban me for simply being better and falsely accusing me of cheating. This is of course unacceptable, and restrictions have to be placed upon the freedom of admins. For example, if an admin is proven to misbehave, his rights to administrate a server need to be taken away to avoid more players being falsely banned. If it were me, I would introduce a mandatory Know Your Customer verification system if a person wants to gain administrative rights on a server, similar to how it's common practice on online casinos' websites today. Only certified players with a verified identity can take the responsibility of owning and administrating a server. If an admin is found to be a repeat offender of false bans, they're forever banned from owning and administrating a server, ever again. There is a reason laws in the real world include consequences if broken. If consequences didn't exist, humanity would only function, if at all, upon the foundations of goodwill. If it was illegal to rob a bank, but there wouldn't be consequences for it, what would stop somebody in need for money from doing it, except their own goodwill and their ethics? Correctly, nothing at all. That's the reason why laws are important, and why misbehavior needs to be threatened with appropriate punishment. The same is true for admin abuse. The reason admin abuse is widely practiced is that falsely accusing players of cheating doesn't have any repercussions. Blatant abuse of power should be subject to penalization, even if it would only result in the abusing admin to lose their right to administrate a server forever. Actions against blatant admin abusers have to be taken to avoid good players being gatekept from playing the game at all. All of this is probably a lot of work and a significant monetary investment for the publisher. However, it's more important than ever to invest into the well-being of the player base. This is especially true for the competitive players. For server providers to use a KYC system and, if necessary, provide them with the necessary money to set up and run such a system. This might be the only real solution to a problem that shouldn't even exist in the first place, because official servers also need to be present at all times. This has been done in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, and it's the only correct thing to do. Keep official servers at all costs. Servers rented by players need to have advanced functionality in order to support competitive play. It has always been the case that certain weapons are banned in a competitive environment. For example, Battlefield 4's ESL rulebook banned DLC weapons and gadgets, alongside with some obnoxious BS that has no place in competitive play anyways, like the Airburst launcher or C4 in the domination mode. It would be a great addition for the competitive scene if certain weapons could be hidden from a player selection menu server side. Let's say a player wants to set up a server for a competition. Make it so that the server owner can select or deselect weapons, gadgets, and attachments. Implement a config system so that presets can be loaded with a simple CFG file provided by the tournament host. This has benefits for regular servers too. Remember playing on a no shotgun server only to be killed by a shotgun player 10 times? This was happening regularly because despite shotguns, for example, being banned by the rules, nothing was stopping a rogue illiterate from selecting it anyways. Only on their first kill, the game would realize that the banned weapon has been used, and the player would be punished by whatever was set in the plugin. The player who died from the forbidden weapon would still get a death. This can easily be avoided by implementing the aforementioned adjustments to the weapon selection. Not allowing to choose a banned weapon in the first place will solve many problems BF3 and BF4 suffered from. The scoreboard has been an important feature of shooter games ever since shooter games existed. Having a working scoreboard in a shooter game is the must-have. It provides valuable information that a player can't forgo. First and foremost, it enables players to gauge how they are performing within the current match. Am I doing good, average, or bad? How good exactly am I doing? Do I have a good amount of kills? Do I have too many deaths? Do I help the team by scoring a lot of assists? All of these are highly important metrics that need to be exposed to the player at all times. Furthermore, the scoreboard provides information about the teammates. What are they doing? Are they getting the necessary kills? How am I doing in relation to my teammates? Are my teammates being helpful with resupplies, heals, and revives? More critical information that also has to be available to every player at all times. Third, it provides information about opponents. Is somebody cheating? Are they doing good or are they not getting any kills? Is there a dedicated reviver on their team? Even more critical information that needs to be displayed to the player at all times. A scoreboard also needs to include every player's ping. It's essential in differentiating a cheater from a lagging player. If the player dies in a weird way, it's good practice to check for the opponent's ping. If he's on a high ping or the ping is varying a lot, it's safe to assume the terrible feeling death is caused by network problems on the part of the opponent. However, if a player dies from a strange one-shot by a weapon that can't actually one-shot and the opponent's ping is stable and low, it could warrant a report for cheating. The player needs the information on ping of all the players in the server in order to gauge the possibility of cheating accurately. Battlefield 2042 and, to my surprise, also Delta Force went down the path of hiding a lot of critical information from players. 2042 in its release date didn't feature a scoreboard at all, and Delta Force to this day hides the death of every player and the pings from the scoreboard. This ties in beautifully with the previous broader point about criticism. What I think is happening is that by omitting a scoreboard or the player's death respectively, an attempt is being made to not offend anybody at all costs. As stated before, any attempt at trying to be as inoffensive as humanly possible to avoid hurting feelings needs to shut down immediately. If a player is bad at the game, tell them that they are bad at the game. Show them by highlighting their position at the scoreboard, rub it in as much as possible. Don't handle the player with kid gloves. I've said it before, and I'm saying it again. Battlefield games are rated for 18+ mature audiences. So if a player can't even tolerate getting his feelings hurt, he shouldn't play games rated for a mature audience in the first place. Anti-cheat, just like the movement, is a part that can really make or break a game. If done correctly, it is a joy to play clean games over and over again without encountering a cheater in weeks. Even though I absolutely despise the game for unrelated reasons, playing Valorant is a refreshing experience when it comes to the cheater situation. My friends who play this game almost every day for multiple hours rarely meet a cheater at all. On the other hand, a terrible or non-existing anti-cheat will immediately break the game. Counter-Strike 2 is a great example of that. Even on the lowest premier ranks, there are cheaters in every game. It goes as far as meeting tier 2 professional players in Silver 4 competitive matchmaking. Because of the unhinged cheater situation, even tier 2 pros are hard stuck in Silver 4, as anything above that is hack versus hack. Counter-Strike in its current state is completely and utterly unplayable, despite the game being actually good. Battlefield needs to make absolutely sure that this doesn't happen to them. A working and effective anti-cheat needs to be present from day one. Attempts at implementing an anti-cheat solution have been made in Battlefield 1 and 5 in the form of EA Anti-Cheat. However, this doesn't seem to be effective at all. I'll admit, the amount of blatant cheaters who fly around, are invisible, or have weapons that are normally not available at the specific maps are mostly gone. That's obviously a good thing, but it needs to be going way further than that. Closet cheaters are still very prevalent and aren't getting banned at all. There's blatant aimbotters around this day in both of the aforementioned games. While it's good to see that an anti-cheat is being developed and put into older games even, it is still a long way to go. While banning fly hackers is a good start, simply disabling fly hacks and just keeping the blatant aimbots and wall hacks circumvents the ban at the moment. There's a ton of room for improvement, and the next Battlefield game desperately needs an improved form of the EA anti-cheat. As is the case with the current implementation of EA anti-cheat, commonly used and highly useful tools like the MSI Afterburner overlay, which shows PC's usage statistics, or basic troubleshooting programs like Wireshark are being blocked by EA anti-cheat. If Wireshark, for example, is detected to be running on the computer, the game won't launch at all and instead display an error message. MSI's Afterburner won't display the overlay. All of this is of course not acceptable, as players are expecting to be able to use their troubleshooting and monitoring tools like they have been for decades. Figure out a way to allow players to use these programs, like they could do before you implemented the EA anti-cheat. For anybody wondering how I got the Wireshark captures while the program is actively blocked, I used a custom computer with pfSense as the router, and it can do packet capture as well in a format that can be imported to and read by Wireshark. Specialists and final thoughts I'll be grouping together, because the specialist section will be so short it doesn't warrant its own category. Specialists were newly added in 2042, and literally no Battlefield player in the history of Battlefield players asked for them. The original class system, as featured in every Battlefield before 2042, was absolutely perfect. Over the years and Battlefield iterations, classes have been refined over and over again. Battlefield Bad Company 2 was the first Battlefield installment which featured 4 classes, and a decade of evolution has brought us to where we have been before 2042. A well-balanced, refined class system that was there to stay. Sure, the classes in BF5 haven't been balanced perfectly, and the medic, his weapons in particular, could have used some work in order to not be P-shooters. However, the overall balance was great, and every class had their right to exist on the battlefield. Whoever in their right mind thought that Battlefield 2042 should abolish this excellent system in favor of cringe, characterless clowns needs to thoroughly re-evaluate his decisions and come to the only logical conclusion. Battlefield games, since their very first installment, have featured classes, and these classes, as we gotten to know them, without any shadow of a doubt, need to return in the next Battlefield game. Never ever does any player want to see specialists ever again. This leads perfectly to my final thoughts, which I want to start by being brutally honest with you, the devs, responsible for the next Battlefield game. Nobody who is actually a fan of Battlefield wants to see you fail. Nobody wishes for your company's downfall. Nobody wants you to go bankrupt. Nobody would like to see anybody lose their jobs. Nobody wants to see the Battlefield series fail. Nobody wants a dumpster fire like Battlefield 2042 was. All we want is a good Battlefield game. This includes every single player who plays Battlefield. No matter if casual, above average, or competitive tryhard. All we want is the same thing. It's abundantly clear that there's a lot of attention on your shoulders when it comes to the next Battlefield game. It's now, more than ever, important that the next game is as convincing as it humanly can be. Never in the history of Battlefield have players awaited a release with as much expectation as they have now. With this high expectations comes great responsibility, and therefore a lot of pressure. The saying goes, hope dies last. Even though I, and a lot of other players alike, have absolutely zero expectation that the next game will actually be a great Battlefield, there's still hope. There are only a few bunch of people in this world who can actually make a difference when it comes to the next battlefield. These people are you, the devs of the game. There's of course more important parts, and all of my points that I've brought up so far are valid concerns, but some stick out more than others. If I had to make a top 3 list of the most important focus areas, it would be these 3, in this order. Number 1. By far the most important. Do not add a skill-based matchmaking system into the next battlefield. Number 2. Reward players' skill. Bad players have to be bad and learn from their mistakes. Good players have to be good and be rewarded for their skill, time, and effort that they put into your game. Number 3. Give players a server browser and abolish the matchmaking system. It's important for you, dear devs, to realize that the dumpster fire that was Battlefield 2042 has deterred a ton of your player base. With the player numbers dwindling, it's more than ever important to actually listen to the players' wishes. If you don't give the players what they want, you'll soon face the consequences. And as I've said before, nobody wants that to happen. For this release, it's finally time for you to take the plunge and simply give players what they want. It's a two-way relationship. You give players what they want, and the players will give you what you want. Money. Having watched dev talks and read blog posts from DICE, it has become obvious that there's too much focus on the quote-unquote future of the game. You're focusing way too much on new, pointless features that nobody likes or wants. There's no need for innovation. History has shown more often than not that you try to reinvent the wheel when it comes to certain features. Case in point, specialists. This is completely unnecessary. Do not try to innovate. Do not try to reinvent. Do not try to be ambitious. Do not reimagine things. All you have to do is do what you've been doing before and improve upon the key problems. Take Battlefield 3 as a blueprint. Look at the game and take the majority of the inspirations from that game. Remove garbage mechanics like suppression. Remove bugs and other annoyances. Call it a day there. There's no reason to reinvent anything that has already been done well in the past. Going back to the roots doesn't mean innovation. It means going back to whatever has worked and has been great in the past. As the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Trying to push innovation, especially this kind of innovation which nobody asked for, won't result in an improvement. Don't try to reinvent things that have already been executed well in the past. If you have enjoyed this video despite my terrible English, feel free to leave a like. Normally I'm not asking for likes, but it would be great if this video would get a little bit more attention than my usual numbers. If you so happen to know anyone related to EA DICE, feel free to forward this video to them. There's one more thing on my own behalf that I want to get off my chest. Describing my current situation as unfortunate would be really, really far from the truth. I'm a multimillionaire and I have everything that I could ever wish for in life. However, as many people might know, having money isn't everything. I'm currently at home all the time, taking care of my grandmother of 88 years. I'm extremely happy to have her, and I'm doing the elderly care job day in and day out. But even though it's my beloved grandmother and I'm doing it wholeheartedly, it can be physically tiring and exhausting at times. Sometimes I would wish for a possibility to escape real life with video games, just as I used to do in the past. No great shooter games that would appeal to my liking are currently out. Battlefield always was my go-to game to have a little bit of fun at the end of a stressful day. This hasn't been possible since Battlefield 5, because playing these games is more of a chore than it makes me happy. To add to that, I'm a very social, extroverted person. I like to talk to people, and I also like to make new friends. Streaming on Twitch has been a long-time dream for me. This is where I'm pretty unfortunate, I would say. Before 2022, I was stuck on an extremely slow internet connection, which most of the time wasn't even enough for the game and TeamSpeak at the same time. Streaming with that connection was all but impossible, nothing more was available, and no plans for expansions were made. Our German government is sadly stuck way in the past, and they haven't realized until recently that fiber internet connections are the future. It took the threatening of sanctions from the European Union towards Germany to be forced to finally upgrade. That was of course 20 years too late, at least. I got an upgrade for 1 gigabit fiber in 2022. At that time, Battlefield 2042 was the most recent game. I already knew by 2018 that a connection upgrade would be coming in 2022. I was super hyped before the release of 2042, as this was the dream scenario. A new game comes out in November 2021, and my connection will be upgraded in early 2022. This would enable me to stream the new game daily as a full-time streamer. As my German viewers know, this hasn't come to fruition at all, as we all know what happened with 2042. To me, as a former competitive player who's extremely observant of anything going on in the game is completely unplayable, even today. I'm quote-unquote unfortunate enough to notice everything that is wrong with the game, all the time. Every single detail wrong with the game I immediately notice when it's happening in the game, which is jarring and it drains out any fun of me within seconds. For me, a solid new Battlefield release might finally be the opportunity to chase my dream of becoming a full-time streamer on Twitch. If somebody would be interested in a good new Battlefield, it probably would be me. Thankfully, I'm in a fortunate position to not be dependent on becoming a streamer and not having the pressure behind it. However, it would be a dream come true. It's dependent on the next Battlefield release. The last thing I want to say addresses every viewer. I've said this in the video and I always say it again. There's a sentiment that all players need to adhere to. Vote with your wallet. If there are signs of any diabolical mechanic, players need to stand together. Despite nobody wanting to see Battlefield fail, it might come down to the community having to do what they so desperately don't want. Speak the universal language that both players and executives understand. Money. If necessary and terrible decisions warrant it, we shouldn't buy the game. And, of course, no matter if the game will be good or not, we should always remind ourselves to never pre-order games. The future of Battlefield is in DICE's hands. It's finally time to steer the ship into the right direction. Whatever happens, DICE will forge their own destiny, and we can do nothing about it but watch. Thanks for watching. Later.